About the outbreak of World War I. This is going to get a little complicated because we're going to be talking about all sorts of alliances and chain reactions of bad decision making. But just bear with me and we'll get through it. Here are your goals. And there is a picture of British soldiers blinded by a German gas attack. That's what we have to look forward to when World War I finally gets started. Okay, so let's start by talking about what Europe was like in 1914. This is a little bit of a review, but there's also some new stuff in here. So in 1914, there were 6 great powers in Europe. And I have them listed here in order of industrial productivity and military might. First, we have Germany, who has the largest military and the biggest industrial complex. Then we have Britain, followed by France, followed by Russia, followed by Austria, and last, and definitely least, Italy. And so by 1914, Europe is basically a huge powder keg ready to explode. And this is because the tensions between the great powers have built up to a breaking point. And these tensions result from all sorts of stuff. It results from mutual distrust as a result of military arms races. It results from conflicting imperial interests. It results from nationalistic jingoism and all sorts of other stuff as well, but those are the 3 big ones. And so many people in 1914 think that war is basically inevitable at this point, and that when it comes, it's going to be short, glorious, and good for Europe in the long run. Some poets start to talk about the idea of this war coming and compare it to a thunderstorm in the summer that will clear the heavy air with lightning strikes. All right, so let's go over some of the international tensions in a little bit more detail. Let's start by talking about the tension between Germany and Britain. So Germany had been rapidly building a navy in order to try and challenge British naval dominance and to try and set up a bigger global empire. Basically, they just want to copy what Britain has done. This forced Great Britain to enter into a naval arms race in which each side built more and more ships. This leads both nations to become distrustful of one another. It's sort of like, hey, why are you building all those ships? I don't know, why are you building all those ships? And so this eventually leads Britain to sign a military alliance with France because Britain cannot keep up with German navy production all by itself. It needs France's help. The second big international tension is between France and Germany. So France is really angry at Germany because Germany took a bunch of land from it, an area called Alsace-Lorraine, in 1870 at the end of the Franco-Prussian War. And basically France has never forgiven Germany for this. As a result, France signs an alliance with Russia against Germany, and they begin helping Russia to industrialize. That way, if war ever comes, Germany is going to have to fight both Russia and France. Germany also at one point threatened France by sending a fleet of battleships to Morocco when France claimed that area in 1911. And as a result of this, France is willing to sign that alliance with Great Britain, where they work together to kind of block German naval dominance. So now France is allied both with Britain and Russia. Big international tension is between Austria and Russia. So Austria and Russia are both competing for the area where the Ottoman Empire used to be. It's circled in black there. This little area is known as the Balkans. And both Russia and Austria want to gobble up all these new little countries and expand their power into that area. But each side also wants to keep the other side from moving in. So they each threaten to attack each other if one of them tries to take any of that territory. As a result, Austria-Hungary seeks an alliance with Germany in order to have backup against Russia in case Russia tries anything sneaky. And so we've got all these different interlocking tensions in Europe. And basically, almost everybody is upset with almost everybody else. We've got Germany angry with France and Britain, Britain worried about Germany, France hating Germany, Austria-Hungary competing with Russia, and Russia competing with Austria-Hungary. And then, of course, there's Italy, who nobody really cares about. And so as a result of these different tensions between the great powers, you get two big alliances. On the one hand, you have the Central Powers, which are Germany, Austria, and Italy. And they're a military alliance. They've got each other's back. And on the other hand, you have the Triple Entente, which is Britain, France, and Russia. So each of you've got the six great powers divided up into two fairly equal alliance blocks. And what this means is that any attack by one nation on the other could trigger a huge war between all of them. So with all these international tensions and this gigantic alliance system set up, a lot of historians would say that Europe at this point was basically like a huge powder keg ready to explode. But a powder keg doesn't just explode by itself. It needs a spark. And the spark that causes this explosion and that leads to the Great War comes in the Eastern European city of Sarajevo, which was at that time part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And so here's a little timeline that helps us to understand what exactly happens. So in 1908, Austria-Hungary annexes its tiny eastern neighbor of Bosnia. And this really angers another small Eastern European state, Serbia, because Serbia believes that Bosnia should be part of the Serbian nation because they both speak very similar languages. So here's that idea of nationalism popping up. And so in 1914, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is touring the capital of Bosnia, which is the city Sarajevo, when he is assassinated in the streets by a Serbian nationalist. In response to this assassination, Austria-Hungary freaks out and assumes the assassin works for a Serbian terrorist group and gets ready to declare war on Serbia. But so remember, Russia is not okay with Serbia moving in and taking more territory in Eastern Europe. And so to prevent Austria from attacking, Russia threatens to go to war to protect Serbia if Austria tries to attack. In response, Germany promises to back up Austria if Austria decides to go to war. With this German promise of backup, Austria declares war on Serbia and invades. In response to the Austrian invasion, Russia begins to mobilize its army in order to attack Austria, but this takes a really long time. Germany sees Russia mobilizing and assumes that this is it, that this is the start of the war that everybody's been waiting for. And so Germany mobilizes using its secret battle plan known as the Schlieffen Plan. And they launch a full-scale invasion of France. Now, why do they attack France? We'll talk about that in the next slide. So why does Germany attack France when it's Russia that's mobilizing its army? Well, the whole basis of the Schlieffen Plan was the idea that Germany was going to have to fight a two-front war, but in the west against France and in the east against Russia. And this was because France and Russia had been allies. And so the goal of the Schlieffen Plan is to capture Paris as quickly as possible in order to knock France out of the war, and then to use railroads to transfer the entire German army to the east in order to crush the Russians. And so Germany goes with the Schlieffen Plan, even though France hasn't declared war yet. But Germany invades France anyway through neutral Belgium, and this helps Germany to get around of many of France's defenses. On the other hand, well, this brings France into the war, obviously, but also, less obviously, it brings Britain into the war. Britain enters the war because they claim that they are protecting Belgian neutrality, but Britain is also motivated by their long-standing alliance with France and their mistrust of Germany. That picture there to the right is the German artillery piece known as Big Bertha. This piece of artillery was used to crush the Belgian fortresses that were supposed to keep the Germans out and allow Germany to rush quickly into France to try and capture Paris. Okay, and so with the German invasion of France, World War I is on. If Germany had captured Paris, the war might have been a lot shorter and a lot less terrible. But France is able to halt the German advance, and the Western Front, the front between France and Germany, degrades into a stalemate of trench warfare. And so now we're in for a long, drawn-out battle. So most of the minor powers of Europe pick sides, like for example, Bulgaria decides to side with the Central Powers, whereas Belgium sides with France and Great Britain. One interesting thing that happens is that Italy betrays the Central Powers and actually joins the Allied powers instead. And both sides settle in for a long, drawn-out war because neither side is obviously stronger than the other. And this is going to lead to some of the most brutal suffering that the world has ever seen, and by the time the conflict is over, millions and millions will have died. So that's what we're in for the next couple of days. I hope you are looking forward to it. Here are your goals again, and also the really depressing picture of the British soldiers again.